Hi and good afternoon. My name is Mary Ann McDonough and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at Erwin, and welcome to this session of Erwin Insights, which is EV06, our Business Process Modeling Roundtable. Our panel today is being moderated by Jamie Armstrong, who's one of our solution specialists, and it is my pleasure to hand it over to him. I know it's going to be a great time with the esteemed panelists that he's got lined up. So over to you, Jamie.
Thank you, Mary Ann. So first of all, thank you everyone for joining. I have with me two guys that I've worked with for quite some time, going back more than 15 years. I have with me Steve Berman, who works at a large multinational pharmaceutical company, and I have Ryan Maddox, who is from Southern California Edison. Perhaps each of you guys could describe a little bit for the audience about yourself, about your role within the organization. Maybe start with you, Ryan.
Sure. So I am a manager in what we call transmission and distribution. So those are all the guys that are keeping the lights on, putting up poles and towers and all that sort of stuff. And I run a organization that looks at ways to do improvements as well as ensure certain governance. We facilitate a lot of like the onboarding and offboarding and other types of like key processes that occur to, in a sense, help those guys keep the lights on. Our organization is called Governance and Provisioning, and so the funny acronym is GAP, and so we're filling the gap wherever we need to, whether that's process, whether that's, some type of compliance or control, you name it, right?
Perfect. I like that, GAP. I've never heard that before. How about you, Steve?
Right. Well, as you said, Jamie, I work with or at a large multinational pharmaceutical. I'm specifically within the clinical development part of our organization, and I have been for quite some time. We have a large number, when you're talking about clinical development, medicinal development, biopharmaceuticals, there are a large number of rather heavily regulated processes for running clinical trials, dealing with pharmacovigilance, and I'm a member of a group within our organization that is concerned with those processes, and in particular documenting those processes in regulated policies, standard operating procedures, and other related documents. So we have a number of people in the group. There are people who specialize in writing procedural documentation. I myself have crafted the Erwin model that we use to manage that portfolio of processes and procedural policy documents.
Great. Thanks, Steve. As I mentioned at the beginning, both of you have been customers of our Evolve product for many, many years. I think it's more than 15 years. It's probably closer to 20 at this point, I think. I would imagine the types of initiatives you've used the software for have evolved, over time as well, right? So, do you think you could talk us through your journey with our software? Like, why did you bring it in originally? How is it being leveraged today? That sort of thing. And Steve, did you want to start this time?
I can certainly start. Yeah, we started using. I think. Well, actually, what was the CaseWise platform was in use within the company, specifically within the IT division, to do traditional CaseWise stuff, data modeling, data flows, that kind of thing. Within the business side of our organization, clinical development, we began using it in, I'm thinking now, 2004, when we had just finished a major merger with another company, and we were in the process of trying to harmonize processes between the two organizations. And we got approval to essentially to build a process model to help with that alignment, if you like, between two very different organizations. I think when we started, we had intended that the process model was just a means to an end. Once we had aligned the two organizations, that would be it. The process model had done its job. In reality, what happened was that model was seen as a valuable resource, not just for those of us concerned with, engineering the new aligned organization, but also for everybody who is going to be involved in that organization going forward, following these now aligned processes. So The model we ended up intending to use temporarily became a long-term resource, which we have maintained ever since. It has gone through a number of evolutions in that time. We've changed the meta model, we've extended it, it's become really quite sophisticated these days. But it's essentially been a solid path, really, from 2004 to present day, where we have a really quite a substantial model that supports, I think, a community of around 30,000 colleagues worldwide within the company who are involved in one way or another with any of those processes in the product development part of the company. So not so much manufacturing, but product development from discovery all the way through to registration and marketing.
That's great, Steve. So just out of curiosity, can you let the folks who are watching this know a little bit about the part of the organization that you roll up to? Are you're within a particular division? You're within R&D, correct?
We're actually, R&D is separate from product development. R&D is more concerned with our preclinical research. There is a clinical development division right from the very top level of the organization that really takes the development of products from their first in human exposure, or first clinical trials, human clinical trials, right through and continuing for as long as the product continues to be developed, which can go even once a product is on the market, it can continue to be developed. New indications might emerge. So we're literally, we are called Global Product Development is the division, and I'm in a particular group that is concerned with the documentation and the training in those regulated processes that we follow throughout that development continuum, from essentially from a first in human clinical trial right through to the withdrawal of a product from the market.
Great, thank you. So Ryan, I was wondering if you could kind of talk us through your journey as well.
Yeah, so I'll kind of start. So next year we will officially have had what was Casewise and of course now Erwin for 20 years. So we've definitely grown with the product. And so we first started trying to better understand our processes, especially as it came to implementing technology improvements, right? So those types of projects, trying to use that process model to bridge the gap in terms of communication between our IT folks and the business folks, right? And helping with that transition. And over time, it evolved to realizing, hey, from a process improvement perspective, we could do what-if scenarios and run simulations to see which one potentially yields not just the biggest benefit, but also helps us prepare for those implementations, understanding what type of resources we need and things like that. And so that was kind of how we first started, kind of first getting our heads wrapped around our architecture and what are our different processes and functions within SCE. And then it, like anything, evolved, right? We got involved in, looking at ERP implementations and leveraging the tool set to really help us understand and get ready for that change management, as well as, leveraging it to provide input for our procedure documentation and really our training documentation. And there's a whole slew of things we were able to do because it's all one big integrated model, right? So if we needed to understand, hey, who's performing this process and how is that process changing, great, we're able to inform our training folks on how to do that. And then when you look at it from another lens, you could say, hey, that they're performing this transaction code and therefore they need this access. And so we started to expand what we could do with the model and really start looking at it from a more holistic perspective, right? And that continued to grow the capabilities where we started leveraging it to drive different improvements, to understand the business, looking at procedure development, looking at different process sessions and workshops. And then we really started getting into more of the governance and operations side. So getting involved in, hey, let's make sure we're clear when it comes to our emergency response so that we're focused on the safety of our people and the public, right? That should be our top priority. So we should have processes that clearly define what actions we should be taking. And then further kind of diving into the various operations and finding ways where we can take that model and make it, a usable thing. To piggyback a little bit off of, what Steve articulated, right, is we kind of first started with kind of this, we did the model, we shared it, we had a conversation about it, it's lived its course, we're done, let's move on, right? And really transition to, we need to maintain this. This is an important business artifact that helps everyone understand what's going on. And that continued to allow us then to leverage that information to drive communication improvements, drive governance improvements around controls and compliance. And then, of course, when it came to our onboarding and provisioning, hey, we clearly defined what hardware and software and access they needed. So we should be able to clearly just execute on that rather than take the guessing game out of it. So we've continued to kind of morph and evolve as part of that.
I love how many times you guys both use the word evolve in your description.
Right?
It's good product naming.
That's just fun, but hey.
And one of the things is I support, as you both know, I support a lot of the pre-sales activities here. So I start working with, prospects and kind of sit down with them and really kind of look at where they are now, where they want to go, where they want to be, that sort of thing. And the thing they're always, come to me with is adoption. How do we get adoption, right? I mean, how do we get this thing started? How do we get those quick wins? Maybe you guys could talk a little bit about, how this thing started to get traction over there and how those kind of quick wins kind of, made the rest of your lives a little bit easier. Ryan, did you want to start out?
I was just going to say, hey, Steve, you want to start that one?
It's not a tough one.
No.
What I was going to ask, actually, Jamie, was when you say adoption, you mean adoption of the idea of building and maintaining a model, or adoption specifically of the Erwin platform?
I'll take both.
Okay, right.
All right. So from an adoption of the platform, obviously, one of the things we like to do with any product we bring in is we like to assess and understand, well, what are we trying to achieve? What are the requirements and things like that? And then, of course, we like to compare them, reference certain things, go to sources, and that's always kind of helpful, right, when you're kind of building the case, if you will. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to delivery, right? So for us, it was, we tied into, what problem are we trying to solve? And it always comes back to that, right? There's some value you're trying to deliver. And so when we started to focus on that, and we were always solving new problems, right? So we would tackle a particular issue, and we started out very small, right? And hey, let's tackle this, and what's going on with this particular project? And then it kind of said, well, hey, that was a success. And we think we could tackle this other issue or tackle this thing. And it continued to kind of mushroom from there as kind of a little bit of a groundswell. That got us enough probably visibility to then get executive, conversations to start, to really start saying, hey, what should we be doing, and what should our standards be, and what's the right kind of framework we want to set up for this. And to use the pun, it evolved over time, right? The best thing about this product so far, in my opinion, has been how flexible it is, right? And it's probably the worst thing about it too, because you really need to, because it's so flexible, because you can design it however you need to meet your business need, you got to be clear, right? You've got to really be focused and targeted. And then, that helps kind of get your foot in the door. And then what we found is once your foot's in the door and you can prove that you've been able to deliver, then the real success comes from taking a step back and looking at the big picture and the architecture and overlaying where is the value you're providing to the business itself, whether that's IT, whether that's some aspect of the business. And then you, in a sense, architect how that would work in that framework. And that's really been, for us, we've evolved that framework over the past, almost 20 years now. And it's constantly changing because the business is constantly changing, right? And so you have to, whatever you create, you have to be prepared for change and you have to be built for that change. Doesn't mean you don't have standards or anything like that. Quite the contrary. It just means that whatever you create, set up a mechanism in which you're able to quickly adapt based off of business needs. That's been our kind of success and how we got it going, right? I'll turn it over to Steve.
Okay. So I'll go right back to the beginning initially. Starting to use, as it was then, Casewise Corporate Modeler was not something we had a great deal of choice about as a business line. The Casewise platform was already in the corporation. It was already licensed. It was there was a certain knowledge base there that we could draw on to learn about the platform and how to use it. But obviously, we were using it in a very different way. We were not modeling, the IT infrastructure of the company. We were modeling the business processes, and this was at the time, was very novel. And I think it's the novelty of being able to look at and interact and navigate between processes within a published model. And of course, in those days, we were using Corporate Publisher, not Evolve as we do these days. Right. Was a novelty for our broader user base. I think that is what drew them to say, let's keep this resource because we find this more useful in some ways than having static procedural documentation that you can pick it up and read it, but you can't navigate, you can't kind of see how one process connects to another in an interactive way. So I think it was the novelty for a business community as opposed to the IT community within the company that caused us to adopt it in essence as a long-term platform for maintaining this portfolio of processes.
Steve,
of course.
I was just curious, would you mind if I asked you a follow-up? So, one of the things that really resonated on our side, same kind of scenario, right, was that ability to pretty much start way at that 50,000 foot level. And, in a few clicks, you're down at the operational, how do you execute this level? And did you guys kind of notice how easy that was to really help translate for the executives on, hey, what's really going on at the lower level? And, those that are executing kind of sometimes maybe buried in the weeds to be able to see the big picture of how they fit into it, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was more horizontal than vertical navigation. Initially, our main interest was really connecting a number of disparate functional lines, helping them because they all had their own individual procedural process documentation, developed to different standards, certainly not connecting to the equivalent, peer processes in some other line function. And what we were able to do by modeling, essentially taking all this existing documentation and building a single model out of it, was to show people in a very interactive way how their individual line functions connected. It only became of more interest vertically later on. We don't have a great deal of depth to our process hierarchy. There are essentially, I think, 3, maybe 4 levels of process. it became of more interest to higher level folks in the organization when the company began to, well, as always, and ever since that very first large merger, has combined with other companies, and we've been able to use the model not just to help peer functions understand the connections between their processes, but for those at senior levels to understand where there are impacts from mergers and acquisitions. We can use the model when we are considering a merger or an acquisition to compare very high level processes, look for gaps, look for overlaps between the potentially merged companies. So it's become more of a strategic resource, but it didn't start. It was more tactical to begin with.
Totally understand. Yeah, makes sense.
I think that's somewhat common for several of our clients. Bring the software in to solve a particular problem, and then realize its value, right? And be able to, I mean, that is critical to be able to get that buy-in, to get those quick wins, so that you can have longevity. For sure. Okay. So, in addition to like processes, I mean, as you're both aware, we can capture any aspects of your organization. So you can not only the processes themselves, but the associated applications, the organizations, the locations, the roles, those kind of things, risks and controls. Just out of curiosity, I mean, what information did you determine is kind of most valuable for your stakeholders, and were there any surprises? Steve?
Interesting question. Well, to begin with, the model, as I think you're aware, was very simple. It was just processes, and at that point, we were a centralized group. We were focused on what we would call global processes. In other words, processes that applied across the organization. Of course, we've extended the model now to include other elements. So we do now include things like locations and organizational elements. So although we have a set of fundamental processes that the entire organization is expected to follow, there are invariably local variants. And when I say local, I mean geographically local. Things vary depending on what country or region you're in, as well as organizationally local, and combinations of those. By organizationally local, I mean within a specific, let's say, division of the company or a particular department. They may have specific ways or specific variants of a given process. So yeah, we've extended the model to include variability at the geographic level, at the organizational level. We do link in applications to an extent now into our processes so that people understand the technology footprint. We in the latter stages, we got increasingly interested in how quality is controlled within our processes. So we now we introduced a control object to be associated with specific actions to represent generic control mechanisms. We have many processes that employ technology, and typically the technology, the application, is used as a supplemental quality control mechanism. Very often the technology is brought in to replace old style forms and templates. It might have been that we control the quality of a particular document deliverable by mandating that people use a standard template, a Word template for something. At some point, somebody says, well, let's re-implement that as an application so that we can capture, the data from that document in technology and use it for other downstream processes rather than it just being held statically in the document. So we treat quality controls very generically, and those controls may be implemented through old tech, documents, forms, templates, or new tech applications. What else have we done? Yeah, all sorts of other extensions. We now differentiate between what we would call jobs and roles. The role we see as an area of responsibility within a process, which is quite generic. But that area of responsibility may be assumed by colleagues with different positions within the organization. So we map between areas of responsibility and the more concrete job positions that we see in the organization. So that's really the way the model has evolved over time to be more useful for different communities, whether you are a particular geographic community, a particular organizational community, or even a particular, function or job within an organization.
Excellent. Similar experience for you, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we started with the process and the narratives, and then kind of the who was performing these in a generic fashion, right? And that really helped us, be able to create procedures and things of that nature, which was super helpful. And then we, started to, of course, expand into, well, what application are you using? Okay, and then is there a particular transaction you're using in that application, right? And that kind of started to expand for us to be able to do role mapping and things of that nature. But what actually was probably one of our more profound connections besides the systems to the processes was when we started to better define some of these roles or groupings of people into what we called, like a job template, if you will. And so we would map that to the process, and then we actually would map the positions, the actual position IDs and people to those job templates. The reason why that was kind of so impactful for us was it really started opening the door in how you can manage change and how you can deal with different aspects of the business model. So you now could look at it and say, okay, well, we're going to change this process. Well, that process has these particular job templates associated to it. That has, 1,000 people that are going to be affected by just that one change. And so it really started to open your door to the degree of that change impact. And then you could take it one step further and say, well, we actually know who those are, so we can actually create a distribution list for the communication, for the training enrollment, as well as what accesses do we need to change or move about. And that really started to open the door for us in that aspect. And then you started to tie in the more of the compliance aspect. Steve articulated, right, those controls and how are you enabling those controls and those processes ensured that, hey, now we can communicate and do both a design of a new control and along with the process. I can't tell you how many times, I've seen companies or, other types of scenarios where, you get a regulation that comes down and says, you must do the following things. And so we're quick as, just human nature to, hey, we've got to address this. I don't want to go to jail for nobody kind of thing, right? And then all of a sudden but when you step back and you take process design principles and control design principles and you start making those connections, you all of a sudden can not only, ensure you're implementing and complying, but also trying to drive process improvement in parallel with that, right? And that's been quite informative for us as well.
That's really
So
good.
I'm curious, Ryan. So we have kind of shied away from getting down to the level of tying job positions to actual people, because that would imply kind of connecting to our HR systems, and that opens up all sorts of privacy concerns. So we've avoided that. Was that something that you guys just went at it? And
it was definitely a similar concern, right?
Yeah.
How are you going to maintain this? And what do you do with this? And all that sort of stuff. But we did end up connecting it to our HR systems. But what we did is we then restricted what info we really needed, right? We don't need any sensitive information at all, right? We just need, hey, maybe their company email address and who's their manager and and that manager's email address, and maybe what their job classification is, and maybe their org hierarchy, where do they sit in the organization, kind of thing, right? We brought that kind of information in, and then because we separated out the person and the position, and that separation really helped us manage the constant churn, so that you didn't have to worry about, I've got to maintain this nightmare, right, of all these movements. And instead, you set up the right processes by which, this position, this, work function, whatever you want to call it, is tied to this organization or this department or this job template, however you want to phrase it. And so that, at the higher level, is what I'm associating to the process. But because I have that connection now, as people are moving from position to position, I'm able then to pull in, hey, by the way, here's the processes or the procedures that you should probably be looking at because they're now part of your job. Or, hey, we now need to manage this access and stuff. So it was that initial, this is a lot. Do we really want to do this? But when we realized what we gained, and it just seemed like every time we were turning around, we saw another benefit from doing that simple connection. And of course, we leveraged, we had, Auto Modeler. We're now implementing, Erwin DT, and leveraging that to do some of the, automated data transformations for us between like our HR systems and Corporate Modeler, or what is Evolve now, right?
Right. Yeah.
But I actually would encourage you to explore it. It's, and if you're ever interested, we could always have an offline conversation. But Jamie knows I'm more than willing to share our pitfalls and joys and everything along the journey.
Well, the one thing we have done is start to look at connecting up to the learning management system, which gives us some indirect information about, colleague positions and numbers of colleagues. But and in fact, that's probably more valuable for us because, every one of these processes and associated policies and procedures, as I mentioned earlier on, are regulated. So that means we have to keep careful track of, who is getting trained. Now, we're certainly not going to track people's training in the model, but we can certainly connect to the curricula that are tied to job positions in the learning management system. Yeah.
Exactly, right, yeah. So we have a similar thing, right, where we're tying in particular, training that you need to take before you can ever get access and things of that nature, and who needs that. And then, of course, we have certain, compliance rules or regulatory rules that we're wanting to make sure are tied and associated. We're not tracing, did you actually complete it? We're saying this is what the requirement is, right? And that's been what's been super helpful, is when you look at it from a holistic business model, you really can start defining a lot of various requirements on operations that really helps your IT and your other, support organizations like HR and all that sort of stuff. Also can help you with your forecasting, when it comes to, hey, I've got this type of hardware, I've got this type of, these devices, these kinds of applications that have these licensing costs. I can now correlate that to, well, we have this many people that need that, and that correlates to probably this many licenses, and be able to do certain resource forecasting and budget analysis and stuff like that, right? Starts to open the door for those kinds of things.
Yeah. It's funny because that actually leads right into the next topic, and the next question I had for you guys was, for those folks who are attending this session, we do offer another product in the suite called Data Transformation, or Erwin DT, which allows you to synchronize the Evolve platform with other systems of record you guys might be using within your organization, right? And I know both of you guys have worked with DT and have integrated with other systems. I mean, maybe Steve, can you talk a little bit about the other types of systems you have kind of integrated with DT and the value of doing so?
Yeah, we did for a period of time pull data out of a business process performance management repository. we have an entirely separate repository that captures a whole bunch of business process performance metrics. And we did, for a period of time, link our model to those metrics and pull data in from that through, and we're using Erwin Collector at the time. We've changed our performance management system, so we've actually dropped that, but we haven't stopped using Erwin DT. We are now using Erwin DT extensively to help federate our models. In other words, we're using it to transfer data between models. We have a fairly complex change management process. We have to deal with the complexities of having more than one version of a potential process being executable, or being available, or being effective at one time. So we actually keep two models. We may switch to three models at the moment, where one model serves as a kind of a working area where the next version of a process may lie for a period of time, and it may take us several months to work on the next version of a process, and a production model, which is the reference for our 30,000 plus users. And we use Erwin DT to move data from one model to another in a semi-automated way. Yeah, so we're using Erwin DT. We don't have quite so many external sources at the moment, but if we more tightly integrate with our learning management system, we would certainly be going the Erwin DT route for that.
Great.
It's funny, Steve. We have a similar, right? We've got what we call a sandbox model, right, where we do a lot of like the design changes and working through 2B type scenarios. And then we have, of course, a master model that is like the published, defined version, right? And once you kind of go through the appropriate approvals, then it's migrated back and all that sort of stuff. So it's kind of interesting. You guys doing a similar thing. For us, we're connecting a lot with more of our like SAP and HR systems. So like some of our pulling in some of that data and obviously pushing some data so that they can take action. And later on this year, we'll actually be working with some of our IT systems to be able to auto-generate or auto-load, access requests and things of that nature. So no human has to manually submit requests when it comes to getting people what they need to be able to perform their jobs and get the appropriate access that's compliant and all that sort of stuff. So we're ensuring the right governance is executed. So we'll be leveraging that, and we've been already starting to use it to make changes and pull data in and transform it. It's been very interesting. I mean, we've used AutoModeler for more than a decade now, right? So actually, coming up on 20 years, right? And so we just recently have been using more of the Erwin DT product, and it's just like, it's like having, the way I would phrase it, right, would be, and don't get me wrong, AutoModeler is a great tool. I really hope actually you guys continue to maintain it and make it better, but it's like having a, bike that was like with training wheels and all this sort of stuff that, maybe goes like 5 miles an hour. Compared to a nice slick Ferrari or Lamborghini that you can, or I'm a Tesla guy, so or the nice new Tesla that takes off like that, right? Same day different.
Yes, I'm finding myself using DT now instead of AutoModeler for doing the simple stuff, just dumping stuff into Excel because it's needed for whatever it might be. It's you can set it up, schedule it. You can also extract stuff through DT that you can't really extract through AutoModeler in one pull.
Absolutely right, and get it formatted the way you might need to be able to share with an outside organization or resource, right? That's some of the beauty of being able to do all those transformations, and so it's been pretty fun kind of getting familiar with that. Obviously, AutoModeler is super easy for like a novice to pick up because it's pretty much wizard based, right? You click, click, click kind of thing. And you got to understand the model and the architecture and how it's all designed more with Erwin DT. But when you have any of that kind of understanding and just get familiar, it's a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can tell we're a little bit geeky on this, Jamie, because
yeah,
it's fun. Right?
for another hour just on
Things.
this.
Yeah, right.
I mean, both of you are pretty aware of the overall solution portfolio that Erwin offers, right? And in both of your organizations, there are different teams who use our data tools as well. For you, Steve, data modeler, certainly data intelligence. I mean, over time, can you see tying your organization's data into the process work that you guys currently do?
I'll start.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Steve. No, go ahead, man.
Yeah.
No,
I was going to say you probably have more to say. We've tried to do that on a number of occasions. I think there have been shifts in tools more on the data side. I think these days they're using different data modeling tools than the Erwin platform. We've continued the Erwin platform for the process stuff, so it's been a kind of a stop-go kind of thing with linking to an information architecture.
Yeah, I think on our side, so we have some folks using other tools, as Steve kind of mentioned, and then we have some that are using the Erwin data modeling tools as well. I do see the benefit, and in the past we've been able to show how when you can connect the data and make the connection between, say, that logical model and the actual process model, and you start to get more context into why you're doing what you're doing. It helps when you're looking at change management and design, both from a process and an architecture in the future. But I think one of the things that I'm more interested in is to see how we might be able to leverage that Erwin DT product to help also bridge some of that gap, because I think it's not just a matter of connecting those, it's also, as things are constantly changing in both worlds, being able to automatically make those associations or those updates, and then being able to see what those change impacts might be. I think there's some real benefit to potentially using Erwin DT for some of that as well. Mm-hmm. So long-winded way of saying yes, but I think there's more to explore there, that we're just scratching the surface, right?
Yeah.
Sure. What do you just curious, I mean, as we've talked about, you guys have been using the tool for a while. It's certainly evolved in the different types of ways in which you use it and that sort of thing. I mean, what do you see on the horizon, the next 5 years for Evolve, for you, Ryan, Evolve at Southern California Edison? Where do you want to go with it?
So people will hear me use this term, one-stop shop. And so we have all these different sources and information, and so I want to simplify things, right? I want to be able to provide a single platform that you can have different audiences focused on different needs, being able to easily access, whether it's another version or another layer, if you will, of the information they care about, that when they go and they can click on it, they're able to get information that's tailored to them, but yet they can also follow the breadcrumbs, or what I like to call pull the string, right? And kind of go on their own journey to maybe understand more context, whether that's understand more about, hey, well, what's the business doing? How many people are really dealing with this type of a process? Or being able to have our auditors and our regulators and things have a platform that says, hey, you want to understand what our controls are and which processes they need, boom, here you go, kind of thing, right? I see us evolving more in, really expanding that business model for different audiences and tailoring that view to meet their needs. That's kind of probably the scratching of the surface that we'd like to do. And as part of that, making those connections then, so you see a better integrated, there's what you call the source of truth, and then you have, source of context, right? Which is, hey, now I can better understand the bigger picture because I pulled in from all these different sources to be able to show it to me in a way I never thought was even possible before, right? I didn't know I could slice and dice this information to understand how an application has this indirect impact on, these many processes and these many people, or that kind of stuff, right? That's where I see us going, and then leveraging some of that to do more resource estimating and resource planning and things like that, because now it's all connected, so we have a better picture.
Oh, that's great. Is that 6 months away, Ryan, or a year?
Everything with COVID is a whole nother different time frame, right?
How about you, Steve?
I would hope that we see greater flexibility in Evolve Designer to provide different audience perspectives. I mean, there are some, frustrating limitations in there. The fact that there is only, one default object page for a given object type, and you can't hide that from any audience. It's always got to be there. So the ability to give more flexibility, I think, to adapt the portal, as it were, for different audiences. So that's for our broader audience. Internally within the group, we would like to, because our model is now really quite large and continuing to grow, we would like to employ much more automation around the management of the content. We find the workflow capability in Evolve, the old Evolve, is just too limiting. I think we were quite excited to hear just recently that we may see in future a tighter integration with other things such as, Microsoft. What's the Microsoft workflow thing?
With Teams?
Not with Teams, yes, but there's also the workflow product. So I think we're excited to see where Erwin goes with that tighter integration with the Office, platform.
Excellent. Okay. I just have just a couple more. I think we're coming up soon on time here. Mm-hmm. If an organization was just starting out on their journey, what advice would you give them? They're setting up a process practice for their company. What's the first thing you would tell them to do?
Don't worry about the platform.
Don't do it.
No, get your modeling methodology sorted out first. Decide what constitutes a process. You have to have a systematic way of delineating a process. Now, I'm only speaking to an organization that's interested in process modeling. That's my area. But if an organization wants to model processes, you have to first of all decide on your method for delineating processes.
Yeah, I would share that sentiment. I think, the fundamental fact of this is both a science and an art, right? And so the science aspect is define your standards, be clear on what the different shapes and everything means, right? So that you're clear in your communication, right? And it becomes easy to share that when you're working with folks that aren't dealing with it day in and day out, right? And then the art side of it is, you need passion, right? You need to care about this in a different level, because once you go down the rabbit hole, there's no kind of coming back, right? You took the red pill and that's it, kind of thing, right? So, I've had many conversations where it was like, once I started down process, it's just there was no ever changing after that. So definitely you've got to care about it. You've got to be interested about it. But the biggest thing I would say is partner up. So this was one of the biggest things that we saw to really help us when we were first starting out, is you either partner up with, an expert or a peer, and you're, doing like a peer review to help you calibrate both. You learn from each other, right? But also partner up with that subject matter expert. Have some key SMEs that you're going to work with, and I think that's been super helpful from us, right? Because they'll help fill in some of the blanks, and they have that level of confidence of they know that space, right? And so sometimes it can be overwhelming coming into an area you don't know, and you're trying to document it, and what's important, what's not, and all those kinds of things. And so I think if you can partner with some good business SMEs, that also helps you on when you're really trying to finesse the art side of it, right?
No, that's great advice. So the one last question I had, Marianne, if I still have a minute. The last question I had was about the environment that we're currently in. I mean, we're doing a virtual conference this year, much because of the uncertainty of this pandemic we're all living through. How has the pandemic affected the work that you do? Are you finding more demand as folks need access to these valuable insights that your team provides?
Well, I can start it. Yeah, I would say, my organization has different components to it, right? My department. One of those happens to deal with access management and getting and granting people access and that sort of stuff. And we definitely have seen an increase in wanting this type of information and application. So I would definitely say, yes, what's interesting about that process is, picture is worth 1,000 words, right? So it helps, answer questions and fill in blanks, especially when you can't be in front of each other, and just get in a conference room and start drawing on the board and having that type of a conversation. So this allows you to share your screen and start having a different type of dialogue, right, in a virtual way.
How about you, Steve?
I'm not sure that I would see COVID as anything different from other major disruptions. The model that we've built has always been useful whenever there has been a major disruption, an acquisition, a merger. Right now we're going through one particular one. So yeah, COVID is disruptive, and at times of disruption, having a model that's been actively maintained proves to be useful. So I don't know that there's anything special about COVID in terms of it's certainly caused more work for our group, but it's not caused us to it may have caused us to draw information from the model that we may not have previously had to draw upon. But I think just, increasing the volume of use of the model and the types of use of the model during times of disruption.
That's really good insight.
Well, I just want to thank you guys for what's been a really interesting conversation. This is not my area of expertise, and I learned a tremendous amount. And I think that it's going to be of great value to people who take the time to tune in. So thanks again to Jamie. Jamie, excellent moderation. And I say that as a pro moderator. So my bar's set.
I got dressed up for you.
Yeah, right. We all dressed up. And Ryan and Steve, thank you again for sharing your experiences and the authenticity of how you got started and what you did and where you're going from here. I especially thought that your advice to sort of people getting started was really powerful. So this is the final session in the Evolve content track for Erwin Insights, but we need everybody to remember that they can access any sessions that they missed, as well as all of the sessions from the data modeling and data intelligence tracks at their convenience, on demand at any time. There's still a few hours left to visit the networking lounge and the solutions booth to ask our experts, and Jamie will be one of those guys in the booth, so anybody and everybody can come and ask him some questions about Evolve and EA and business process modeling, or drop by the IT Central Station booth and share a product review. So again, thanks for your time today, guys. We really appreciate it. Have a terrific day, and thanks to all of you who've attended Erwin Insights.